somebody goes brain dead, their brain is not showing any brainwave activity. And yet, in many, many instances, they continue to have a fully cognitive process. They continue to think, they continue to react. They see the people in the room that are trying to resuscitate their body. They oftentimes start going through the dark tunnel with the light at the end, and then they meet their relatives who have deceased, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same old story everybody tells.
Mm.
The point of the matter is that during that time that they have an unbroken perception of consciousness, the brain is showing no electrical activity at all. And so that is one of the many ways in which we can establish that the mind is non-local. The mind is only superficially tethered to the brain. The brain is actually more of a relay station for the mind. And where it gets even more interesting is the fact that the mind interfaces with us on every single cell in our bodies. So since it is believed by mainstream science that the DNA molecule contains all the code to build the whole body, the DNA therefore would contain the whole code to build the brain. And therefore the brain is non-locally contained in each DNA molecule.
I see, yeah.
By its information.
I guess we almost could say that if we compare it to, for instance, take a computer, then that all the parts of a computer are totally, useless unless you turn the energy on and you can actually, start using it, right?
That's exactly right. We have the hardware, and we need to power it and then use the software. And the software is actually, you could say, the energy body. And the power is basically this interface that happens between our reality and a parallel reality. And that's another very complicated subject. There's actually, you could call it a hyperdimensional domain, but basically we have a parallel reality that we are constantly intersecting with.
Okay.
And it's a very strange thing to contemplate, because basically what happens is space and time are inverted in this reality. So that means that in our reality we have 3 dimensions of space, which we can move around in freely, and we have 1 dimension of time, meaning that time is essentially a stream that pushes us forward in time, and it doesn't really move around. If you actually get into relativity theory from Einstein, you discover that he says that space and time are a fabric, and that one cannot exist without the other. The two are fundamentally intertwined. So what this ultimately gets to, and the Russians have done amazing work on this stuff, is that our notion of time is as primitive as the dugout canoe. We are so behind the times, pun intended, in terms of how time really functions and what it really is. Time is, in fact, an entire 3-dimensional domain. And we only can perceive the reflections of it, much in the same sense of that classic flatland analogy that probably all your readers have heard, where if you live in a flat plane and then a sphere pushes through your plane, all you see is a circle that starts as a dot and gets wider and then gets narrower.
Sure, yeah.
In much the same way, time to us appears to be just something that keeps moving forward. We don't realize, for example, that time is cyclical, that there are cycles of time that overlap each other and actually have influences on our consciousness to such a strong degree that very similar events happen in each iteration of the cycle. So the cycles actually can be mapped out in terms of the ages of the zodiac, which is a subdivision of the precession of the equinoxes. This is the 26,000-year cycle that many ancient cultures would document in various mythologies.
So
the cycle that makes the Earth wobble on its axis like a top, slowly wobbling in the opposite direction as it spins. Now that cycle appears to be not just something in the Earth like the mainstream would tell you. You can find blueprints of the same exact cycle in long-term activity in the sun, and it also appears to be related to energy sheets, essentially, that we're moving through in the galaxy that are causing that rotation in the first place.
Very interesting.
But when we're dealing with cyclical time, I have a book on my site about what's called psychology, and it's written by a Frenchman named Michel Helmer. And he essentially did some phenomenal research in which he discovered that, first of all, if you take the precession and you chop it down into 12 chunks, they're 2,160 years in length. And many people say, oh, the age of Aquarius, right? We're moving into the age of Aquarius.
Sure.
Well,
yeah.
Each of these ages are 2,160 years long. The last one was the age of Pisces. You have to ask yourself, if this is just an arbitrary thing, why would the ancients have put so much energy into it? Why would they bother to take astrology signs that typically only take 1 month to occur, and then blow it out over the course of 2,160 years?
Yeah.
Well, Michel Helmer went back and looked at Roman history, and then advanced Roman history 2,160 years ahead in time, and discovered that the precise nature of events in Roman history were playing out again in American history.
There we go. Huh.
And this is like wars lining up with wars.
Yeah.
Even the nature of who was in power, how did the government run, what kind of conspiracy happened. Watergate is in there. Jimmy Carter is in there. He was Emperor Cato of Rome. All kinds of very strange things like that.
Wow.
And so, but the biggest one, of course, is 2012. And when you start realizing that these cycles exert such a strong effect on our behavior, that 2,160 years apart from each other, the same events keep repeating themselves in history. The end of the cycle is really where all the magic is. And there's a very strong effect that can happen. Now, we have a scientist in the U.S., Dr. James Spottiswoode, who discovered, he looked at, this was another thing I was going to put in the film, but we just didn't have the time, the screenplay to do it. But Dr. Spottiswoode analyzed over 20 years' worth of ESP studies. And this was remote viewing, Zener cards, Ganzfeld studies, et cetera, in which ordinary people were tested for how psychic they were. And what he did is he was looking for a universal factor in time that affected how psychic somebody was. Maybe if the sun is at high noon, then there's something about that alignment that makes you more psychic. He couldn't find anything in an ordinary day that would determine how psychic somebody was. However, as soon as he looked at the Earth's position relative to the center of the galaxy, which is called sidereal time, the center of the galaxy's position has a huge effect on how psychic we are. So when you're at 14 hours and 30 minutes sidereal time, and you can go on the internet and look for a sidereal time calculator and find out where it is in your area. When you're at 14 hours, 30 minutes, your psychic ability skyrockets to 400% more effective than normal.
All right. And why is that?
The reason why that matters is it basically is telling us that where we are in the galaxy has a direct impact on how our consciousness functions and how much of these higher consciousness abilities will come through. So, and we also have a strong field effect on each other. So I know I'm going off in a whole bunch of different directions here, but to get back to the core of your original question, this first film doesn't go into half the stuff I've just told you. What we're trying to do is establish the fundamental reality of a consciousness field so that we can start to open the door on these other discussions, which will then come out in documentaries and other films later. But we're establishing a baseline, we're establishing a fundamental that we can work from that proves with great redundancy that consciousness is connected to DNA, flows through DNA, and that it actually is a non-local field that we're all sort of co-creating moment by moment.
Very interesting. You mentioned so many things there that I would love to go back to and address a little bit further. But what I would like to ask you is why target the mainstream? Why is it necessary at this particular time to kind of get this information out to the masses, as it were?
It's probably just a subjective emotional decision on my part that I would like to make an attempt to do that. It may not work. It probably will. I think that what's happening is, for example, my partner, my co-executive producer on this project, Billy, has not really experienced synchronicity. Now, I would imagine that most of the people listening to your show are having synchronicity erupt into their lives. This is where, of course, as we all know, you're being taught, you're being acculturated to a physical world in which you're alone here and things happen randomly that are damaging and destructive. Things like the Holocaust are brought up. It's like, look at these terrible things that can happen. There's nothing you can do about it. So you basically have to protect yourself and defend yourself.
Mm.
Well, that leads to the idea of total separation, that you're alone, that you're disempowered, that nobody's there to help you or protect you, that basically it's all or nothing and you're in it for yourself.
Mm.
Synchronicity is what's happening where people's lives are starting to have an intrusion of a transcendent force. In other words, let's say that you're sitting there and you're reading something very provocative in your book, and you say, I wonder what time it is, and you look up at the clock, and it's exactly 11:11, or 3:33, 4:44, or something like that.
Mm.
I know one person who would find pennies on the ground at very, very poignant moments for them. Now, my friend Billy, as I said, he's not experienced this most of his life, but the other day he was going to eat some hot dogs. He had them frozen in the freezer, and he was trying to break them apart with a knife, and they wouldn't break apart, and he couldn't figure it out, because in all the years he's been eating hot dogs, this never happened, and it just would not come apart.
Mm.
And then he has this thought, I wonder if I'm being told that I shouldn't be eating these hot dogs. Right?
Yeah.
See, these are the kind of silly stories that you can tell are true, because that's how it really happens.
Yeah.
Right? So he's like, I wonder if I shouldn't be eating these hot dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, he hears a knock on the door upstairs. Package! He goes upstairs to get the package. The package is from Nutrisystem, and it was a whole bunch of health food that he had specifically ordered so he would start having a healthier diet.
There we go. That's nice.
And he calls me up and he's like, do you think this means I shouldn't eat hot dogs? Yeah.
That's probably it. Yeah, right.
Or at least decrease how often you eat them.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's happening, man, is that a lot of people are starting to have these things happen, and they don't realize that it's happening to just about everybody. And so I think if we can reach people who are sort of on the fence, where they're kind of believing in this stuff, but they're kind of still not believing in this stuff, you can see that it's a social trend. You look at all the big multinational corporations and their media, everything is going metaphysical. You got Heroes on television, is a very popular television program.
Mm-hmm.
More and more movies coming out with metaphysics in the theme. You know, there's that Will Smith movie coming out, I Am Legend, that's another End Times 2012 kind of movie.
Sure.
So everybody's getting into this, and so if we can help nurture that, then it may have a similar effect as a film like The Secret did, or Bleep, if not greater. So that's basically why we started out reaching out to the common person, because if the average person figures out what we're talking about, it could trigger a social revolution akin to the discovery of powered flight with the Wright brothers. I mean, we're talking about that kind of level. If we can break the scientific stranglehold that has separated spirit from science, which goes all the way back to the formation of the Catholic Church, and then with the Reformation and the Renaissance, the Church basically said, okay, you guys work on science and we're going to do God. And as long as the two don't cross, then we're going to be fine. We won't have any problems.
Sure.
And that artificial division has maintained its integrity all this time, so that you have scientists who are working all week to disprove God's existence and then go to the church to pray to Him on Sunday.
Sheesh, it's all messed up. You know, do you think that this has to do with, is it, this, you were speaking about time earlier, so again, and synchronicity, obviously, is this what it's all about? Is this the right time? Is it the good time right now to actually bring this into the mainstream and kind of tutor, I guess, people in this kind of thinking, or at least heighten their awareness? Yeah, you have to
understand that when you start getting into fractals and chaos theory, we've all heard this. The easiest way to begin to talk about this is the classic analogy of the flap of a butterfly's wing on one hemisphere causes a hurricane on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it gets a lot more complicated than that.